I have a feeling it's all gonna be in here, so I'm not worried.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. All the good things.
All my neighbors are mad at me for it.
Sorta.
Your neighbors are their own. They can do whatever they want with their place.
Yeah. They wanted to spend the 250 grand to buy the lot, they could have done it too. Mm. It's funny, as I was just looking at.
Just not yours, Susan. You don't need it.
This little office. And so it's on the bid.
Good. You ready, Susan?
Send that to Shannon. It's like, let's buy this. She should.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Call the city council joint work session with planning commission of July 31st at 6 PM to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Allison.
Here.
Tom Baylor,
Here.
Kathy Sherman is absent. Casey Kinsman,
Here.
Wendy Rainey,
Here.
Dave Zastro,
Here.
Kristen Carpenter,
Here.
and Ken Jones.
Here.
And I will call the roll for the planning. Tanya Harrison. Tanya, do you- okay, got
I think
it.
so.
Mark Hall,
Here.
Chris Boland,
Here.
Sarah Tremblay,
Here.
Chris Rainey,
Here.
Dale Foodie is absent for now. Sean Danadell is absent. We do have a quorum of both bodies.
Okay. So tonight we're doing a work session on incentives, et cetera. And since it's a work session, if anybody in the audience has anything constructive to add, throw up your hand and we'll try to get you worked in there, because we want as much information as we can get here. So who's leading us off, Sam, for the Prince William Sound?
Kristen.
Kristen?
Sure.
So, yeah, in my day job with the Prince William Sound Economic Development District, we have been working with a housing working group for the last year and a half. So we've got, we've had the Cordova City Planner, the Valdez City Planner, a couple people from the Village of Chiniga and the Chiniga Regional Development Group. And we got some technical assistance to get support from the Minnesota Housing Partnership. So yes, they're in Minnesota. They are a HUD-approved technical assistance provider, so they work all over the country. And some of that money was used to commission this Prince William Sound Housing Needs Assessment. So I could take a few minutes and go through that and then just do a quick summary of sort of where we're headed, if that's okay. So I know you all had this in your packet. I thought I would just highlight a couple of the things that really stood out to me from the housing needs assessment report as it pertains for the information they got about Cordova. I will say, just as a note, so the whole report's available online. It's on our website, and I think Susan posted it on the city page. And so there is a summary in the back. The summary page has kind of the aggregated recommendations, which can be handy. But in terms of Cordova, like I said, what really jumped out at me was kind of the number of dilapidated homes that we have in town. And I don't know about you, but like, as I walk around town now looking, I see them around town because it sort of was heightened in our awareness. And I also think that there's probably less housing on the market now than when I first came to town 30 years ago. There are probably fewer units. So yeah, units have kind of come off the market or become uninhabitable faster than they've been added to the market over time. You know, we've seen our home builders kind of age out of the profession, and one or two or a small handful of folks individually are coming into the workforce, but it doesn't seem to be replacing what we had before. So fewer units on the market, stuff coming off the market due to structural deterioration. So our inventory is smaller. And I was also really struck by the figures about the age of our housing stock. So of the approximately 1,000 occupied homes in Cordova, 75%, 3/4, were built between 1960 and 1999. So that housing stock, 25 years old, we have to think that that stuff is energy inefficient. I know that the figures from research done by the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation shows that I think it was like 54% of the homes are considered drafty, which means they have like 7 air exchanges. I guess it's in 24 hours. It can't be in 1 hour, but it's a really high rate of air turnover. So highly energy inefficient. I will also point out in the section, it's page 8 of the packet. I don't know what page number of the report it is, but on page 8 of the packet talks about the vacancy rate in Cordova and how it does say it's lower than both the Chugach census area rate and Alaska statewide. I just wanted to say that they say of the approximately 200 vacant units in Cordova, 38% are held vacant for seasonal use. That's a lot of the bunkhouse space that we have in town. So just in case you were wondering, that we do not have an oversupply or a high vacancy rate. And then the other part that I think everybody knows anecdotally, but is borne out by this survey is talking about housing attainability and looking at what is somebody who's making 80 to 120% of the average, is that what it is? Average medium income. What can they afford to buy in the way of what can they afford to pay for a home price? And it's just around $200,000, $200,000 to $300,000. And I think we all know that there aren't very many homes in this town in that rate. They did look at the MLS listings for homes that have turned over here recently. But because so many homes get sold by word of mouth, they don't end up getting listed in the MLS. So they don't show up as what is the typical price for a 2, a 3, or a 4-bedroom home. So that's kind of the hole in our data. But anyway, I think it does show that there's a really strong need for what I think people are calling middle income housing. There's housing available at a certain rate, but is it attainable? Not for a large number of people. So that's kind of our big gap, is needing to create more affordable with a capital A, and then also attainable with a lowercase a housing for middle income folks. And I think that is something that's happening all across the country. Developers for a long time have not been building starter homes. They're building large homes, but for people just starting out, or couples that don't have kids yet, or a single person, the housing stock that's available to those folks is a lot more limited. So we can get more into what we want to do about it. We can talk about strategies. I do just want to mention that we're working on organizing a developers and home builders site visit for the middle of October. We're reaching out to folks statewide through the Alaska Home Builders Association, and also in the Pacific Northwest, to invite developers up here to take a look at what we have. I'll be working with Kevin on providing a list of properties that are available to folks. And we've been talking about trying to get an online display or a viewing tool so that people can look at our properties in a GIS format with an aerial view, so they can see, what properties are near what pieces of city infrastructure, other community features. Valdez already has something like that online, so we're trying to match that. We did meet with, Kevin met with some folks from the University of Alaska's land office maybe a month ago or so. They came and did a site visit, and we told them about our site visit for developers, and I think they're interested. I'm hoping they will come back, because it would be great to have them also talking to developers about the property the university has. So I think what we'll be talking about tonight is pretty, a really good pairing, that we're talking first about housing development strategies, and then also sequentially later about economic development incentives. But I think the question that we need to be thinking about is, what is council willing to do to provide development incentives? You know, how far are we willing to go? What are we willing to do to make it possible? I think we all know that the cost of developing here is higher. Getting construction materials here is expensive. So if we're competing with a developer who maybe has a project in Anchorage or in the Copper Basin or in the Kenai Peninsula, and we want them to come here, we've got to be willing to make it worth their while to be able to help with them getting the profit margin that they need. I mean, I'm not saying we have to give away the farm, but I think we need to look at that question really hard. So there's a range of strategies that we've talked about. There are things like incentives for developing land, incentives to homeowners for improvements or accessory dwelling units. There is also, the Economic Development District is going to be pursuing funding to help create a housing trust fund, which is something that could be a flexible funding pool. There is one that's been established managed by a group called Housing Alaskans. And they use that to kind of be the last money on a project. So if there's a community that's developing a senior housing project or some other affordable housing project, and they've managed to pool some federal money and some local money, and they need 200,000 or 600,000 to cap off the money that they already have, that's what that money typically goes for. And it's not, well, I take that back. I think their priority is affordable with a capital A housing. So housing that qualifies by federal standards as affordable. If we were to create a regional housing trust fund, we could use that money in a more flexible way if it was our own. We could do things like, maybe there's a piece of property that we do want to provide an incentive for a developer, and we want to use that money to put in utilities or an access road or something like that, or use that to give them some other kind of incentive. So that's something that we're going to be pursuing. And yeah, so there are tax exemption and rebate incentives we could look at. There's like I said, which maybe also falls under the heading of incentives you can provide to developers for developing certain pieces of property. And then we also, the Economic Development District, and I can't make a blanket commitment from the Minnesota Housing Partnership, but we are eligible to apply to them again for assistance if we want help with grant writing for certain applications. And I know that, I think that the Native Village of VIAC is also pursuing funding. I think they're talking about or they've been talking about submitting a Indian Housing Block Grant funding application. I think Chiniga is also doing that this round. So, yeah, so there's a range of things that we can work on, which is kind of how it always is. There's not going to be any one silver bullet that helps us solve this issue, but there's a few different things we could do. So, yeah.
I guess what comes to mind first off is what are the incentives that developers want? I mean, we can say this is what we think they want, and let's, if we offered X, Y, or Z, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I'm just curious if have you talked to developers, or what are other communities doing that have brought developers in? I think that's a starting point. We're not just shooting in the dark.
I don't have an answer to that
Okay.
yet, but like I said, we're working on kind of compiling a list for people that we want to invite to this Home Builders Summit. So we got a membership list from the Alaska Home Builders Association, so I can start with them.
Yeah, and I just, if what does it take to pull them from their Anchorage project and get them to Cordova or the Valley or insert wherever? Well, and if it's not, and what does it take to get someone from Washington or down south to come up and say,
Yeah.
if we hit this, then it's worth my time and
Yep.
effort.
I think too, though, I mean, that's great to look at bringing in the outside developers, but we have a resource here, an incremental development and infill development.
Mhm.
You're looking at incentivizing the property owners that are living here, that are paying taxes, to put the mother-in-law home or the tiny home on their property and rent that out to seasonals so that the stable housing that we have isn't necessarily taken up with seasonal rentals and that can be put out for year-round rental. So the incremental development is where I'd like to see us really push to get some incentives so that folks in town with property are willing to add some housing, to their property
Yeah.
separate from their main property and work with that instead of trying to bring in the big development project, because that just is that's a long-term goal, but not a short-term solution. So.
Well, I think it's a combination. I mean, if you say to a developer, like, because yeah, we both know that there's all kinds of infill opportunities. And if you put together a portfolio for them and say, here's some options, yeah. But yeah, absolutely infill. We don't need, I mean, there's plenty of opportunities Main Street has places where there used to be housing, rental housing, yeah.
But that to me is still, someone has to build this, and we don't have that in our community. We've already established that was very well put in this, very fancily put in here, that we just don't have people who have the skill set to do the things we need to do. So even if we have infill we want to do, that still is what is the incentive for someone to come into town and do the infill work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was getting hung up on the difference between contractor and developer. That's all. So.
Yeah. I do think I've been meaning to get in touch with Weston Bennett because he was a graduate of the university's construction management program. He used to work here, but I thought he might even know some folks or know some people at that school, or as a way to connect with people who've come through that program.
Oh.
Yeah.
And what's available locally for like community education regarding all of this housing and funding opportunity, like a nonprofit organization or a large agency like the Village is looking for these grants, but what about the homeowner who's,
Mhm.
what have we had locally that's an educational opportunity to bring people in and say, hey, this is what's available. This is how you do this. Let's walk you through it and help you get it.
Yeah. Yeah, we can do that. I mean, I certainly think about stuff like that with regard to weatherization.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's definitely money available, so.
And heat pumps.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Heat pumps, but with I have heat pumps, and with our current electric bill, it's not. That's
Yeah. And
a tough one.
I've got a heat.
I want it to work so bad.
I've got a heat pump and it's more expensive than running my oil.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Kristen, with all your experience in the past with HUD and other organizations that you've worked with, I'm curious about block grants, and in particular the Indian Community Development Block Grant that's described in this report.
Mhm.
How would that work in Cordova?
Well, for the Indian housing block grant, it would go to the tribe.
Go to, like,
I mean, the tribes are the only ones who are eligible. Yeah. So it's going to be housing that they develop for their village members, probably on their land or on land that they have site control of. Yeah. Yeah. But, oh, sorry. But that would certainly still help, help with, having people in our community find homes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a significant amount of money through these block grants.
Yeah.
I mean, look at
Mhm.
the other grant opportunities are pretty small, but
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
really does have an impact, the kind of money that you could get through.
Right. I think, I'm not sure how competitive they are. I mean, I think you have to have a pretty solid project. But yeah, the funding levels, like you said, are high. Yeah, and they're gonna have, I imagine, have pretty high levels for the next 2 or 3 years at least. So,
Why is that? Why is that?
well, I think it's probably part of the infrastructure
Right.
or
The National.
Inflation Reduction Act and the right infrastructure legislation. Yeah.
Money's been allocated already.
Yeah.
And they want it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, go ahead, Tom.
I think another avenue that perhaps we should look at is there a way with scholarships and other incentives, could we start incentivizing some of our own people, seniors graduating, even if you're 20, 30 years old, if you commit to the program over there in Seward, if you'll come back and work in Cordova for X amount of years, we'll pay for your schooling. We need to start incentivizing some of the local kids to grow up and do what we used to have, 5 or 6, 8 carpenters in town. That would be a tremendous help. And I don't know how we go about that, but I'm sure we could find some money, some scholarship money, and work through schools and other avenues and start generating some local carpenters. That would be a big help for the community.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And the Prince William Sound College in Valdez, their campus, they have a construction program also.
You know that NBE has in the past had programs and grants and stuff for their graduating seniors to go to trade schools. That would help pay for the whole amount of their trade school. I know several kids that have went to Tech and Seward that had everything paid for. So it was a huge help to them, and I've seen them flourish in those trades.
Cool.
That is true.
Mhm.
We, there are definitely funds available to send tribal members to, continue in education. And the tribe is actually bringing a construction class to Cordova in September. And we're gonna have 2 1-week courses, 40 hours a week. And the first one will be Introduction to Construction. And that will just kind of your base, learning the equipment and measuring and all that kind of stuff. And then they'll be making a small like footstool that first week. And then the second week, it will be more focused on framing and sheetrocking. So that is open right now. There's 10 spots for each of the classes. And you can find me across the street at Pioneer Square at NBE if you guys have more information.
It's open to everyone then, or just Village?
It is open right now because there is 10 spots. It's open to tribal members first, but if we don't get the 10 people, it will definitely be open to the public. So if you know people that want to get on the list that are not tribal members, we definitely can start a wait list.
And I've seen on the ground people who have learned through AvTech, picked up some of these classes, help other people over the winter, keep other things actually functioning and getting through the summer, and buildings not going to seed, because they kind of have a network and help each other a little bit and call each other when. So I think the more people we can just get on wait lists and get queued up and get some of it, the more of a network of people we have who live here, who understand what it's like to live in a house here, who will be more up for helping each other during this transitional period.
Great.
Is Cordova going to the Housing Summit on August 29th? Do we have a representative going to Anchorage for that? The Alaska Housing Summit's August 29th in Anchorage?
Don't know.
No, I mean, not the,
Currently.
Okay.
Wendy, when was that?
August 29th at the BP Energy Center.
It looks, yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, it's sponsored by the Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness. So I think that's a big part of it, but yeah.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Sarah, if you wouldn't mind getting a hold of me maybe tomorrow and the next few days, I'd have some good thoughts on helping get people trained up and maybe some of the things to help them along, and it's everything from how to get started and what insurances you need and what licenses you need and the opportunities that are in town. So maybe
Okay.
get a hold of me and I can help you out with that.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, so where are we at?
Mr. Mayor, another comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess for me, if and I do know I know a couple lots in town that I've been looking at over the years. Um, I'm kind of getting past my prime on that stuff, but if I was gonna do that, one of the I think the incentive that I would look for is if I could, one, purchase the property at a reasonable rate, or lease the property, depending on, my situation, probably just lease it and then buy it when it's done, but not be taxed on the property till the unit was built, and not be taxed until the unit was sold. And then the next occupant, that's when your property taxes would start. I think that would be enough incentive for me to move forward with that, because it might take a year, and that extra couple $1,000s I would have to pay on property taxes. Uh, it would be nice not to have to do that. And then once that house is out in the open market, then yeah, tax it. I think the city public works department does a great job hooking up to water and sewer lines. I don't think their rates are that expensive, but that's an avenue that we could look for. I mean, you have to pay for materials, but maybe if they could go forego their labor time to hook up a piece of property, so a house could be built on, that could be a small incentive that, without stressing out the rest of the taxpayers. So those are little steps, but they would be helpful for the individual builder. Thanks.
Yeah, in the part about examples of local government actions, there is a section about tax abatement and exemptions. And there's one example: the city of Cincinnati did a residential tax abatement program for improvements on a property, including new construction and renovation that increases the property's value. The abatement allows owners to pay taxes on the pre-improvement value of their property for 10 to 15 years. Tax abatements will stay with the property throughout the abatement period and can transfer to any new property owner within the approved time period. So there's a few different examples similar to that. Yeah, so kind of like what Tom was talking about.
So, I've got quite a few thoughts on this topic, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to dive into it and give it a more serious consideration. From a personal standpoint, as a young, abutting, trying to be a developer, one thing that is a challenge that I've faced over the last few years is access to capital at a reasonable interest rate. So I was kind of hitting the ground running, had a bunch of projects rolling, got the triplex done, got the brewery project done, bought a property next to my house, and then all of a sudden interest rates went from 3-4% to 9-10%. And that has just completely stopped a lot of my progress. So maybe, that's not really something the city has any control over. That's more geopolitical, national politics. But if you're talking about establishing an endowment fund, potentially evaluate a revolving loan fund for local development where it's not just grants that you give out to developers, but, maybe, short 5-year loans that have reasonable interest rates. I think that could help with local developers quite a bit. And then also, one thing that I've heard from other developers, I haven't had this experience yet. I've had great experiences working with city staff, but I have heard some complaints from people who've tried to develop in the past that they put in a letter of interest on a property, and then it goes to all these different meetings, and eventually it just invites, it goes out for RFP, and then it invites all this competition, and they get no, basically there's no bonus points for being the first one to even put in the letter of interest. And so they, there's a couple examples throughout the years of people being the person to put in the letter of interest, and then the city picks a different project, and then the project never happens. And that's very frustrating for people, for the local grown developers especially. And so I think that we should evaluate internally is maybe we add, if you're the first person to put in the letter of interest, maybe you get 10 points on your scoring matrix right off the bat. And then the other competitive proposals, they need to, step up their game even higher to try to beat that initial applicant. That's an idea that I had, was brought up to me, so. I like the idea of the property tax incentives. I know I sent that email like over a year ago about it. I think it's been circulated, but have single family homes get, 3, 5 years, whatever it is we decide, have, if you add a unit to a home or to a property, then you get so much. If you take take a large single family home and turn it into 3 apartments, like what I did with my grandparents' house, that could qualify to some degree. Or if you build something new, if you build a 4-plex or an 8-plex, different layers, I would like to see us pursue something like that. So, and incentivize if we want 8-plexes, if we want 4-plexes, I think we need to have that conversation. We want single family homes. We need to target that with the highest amount of abatement we can go. And that's how we incentivize it. So, thanks.
Yeah, Wendy.
Yeah, I'd like to see us take a look at the codes around tiny homes too, and what is considered a tiny home, whether it's on wheels or not on wheels. I think that would help some of folks coming in if they buy the property, but they can't afford to do the full build. Can they get an incentive to put a tiny home on that piece of property while they're building? I mean, and I don't know what the codes involved with the difference between an RV and a tiny home and a mobile home, or I don't know where that stands. I was trying to look in the code earlier today to see how that's separated out. But, that's something that I think might attract people to come in if we say, hey, I know this is expensive, but you can do this in the meantime on your property and maybe alleviate some costs associated with that to get folks into the community. Because we all know once you're here, you're going to want to stay. You just got to get here. So
lower the barrier to
yeah,
entry.
lower the barrier to entry, I think is a key for that.
That
We
reminds
already
me.
have that program. You can apply for conditional use permit, put a trailer on your property while you're building your house. So there is a process that allows that.
While you're building your house.
While you're building your house.
Yeah, but I think you're talking about something.
I'm talking about a little longer.
Well, there's the planner could probably speak to better this, but I know people have purchased lots, they put trailers on them. They've monitored them because the lot got filled and it's settling. And it's been a couple of years, but they've come back every year. They're showing that they are going to build. This is not a permanent thing. Then a foundation gets built. Sometimes I've seen it take 3 or 4 years to get the house built, but there is a process for that, and it works. So.
Ken?
So I guess that kind of reminds me of one other thing that I have a little bit of personal experience with is a conditional use permit. So I've got the property next to my house, went through the whole process, got a conditional use permit. City staff have been great to work with on that. The Planning and Zoning Commission was great to work with on that. But one thing that I've run into there is, issues with neighbors over, they get disgruntled over the fact that the city granted me a conditional use permit. And, I feel like we need to update our code a little bit and our zoning to allow for detached triplexes and detached 4-plexes. It's becoming a very popular development method, especially out in Wasilla and areas that have less zoning and less building codes than we have here. But it's a great way to develop multiple units on one lot. And unfortunately, in my situation, it has disgruntled some of my neighbors, the fact that I wanted to build 3 cabins and rent them out as Airbnbs. But I mean, the city is allowing me to do it. So I'm slowly moving forward, but I feel like if we can update the zoning and update the code to allow for that more easily, for that type of development, then maybe it would get some of the rhetoric out of the window. It's just, no, this is something that's allowed. It's not a special thing that I'm applying for. So I think it would help future developers.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic because that's what seems to be a big part of the solution is building on existing land that's already developed. In the report, it talks about the sense of perceivable lack of buildable land. What do they mean by that? Because it seems like it's not.
A lot of
just
people say we don't have enough buildable land, but we actually have quite a
Yeah.
few places where you could build.
Yeah.
No,
So I guess that's what they mean by perceived. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of the well, it's the perception, but it's not necessarily the reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of the land that would potentially be buildable isn't ideal land to build on. It
Yeah.
would take a lot of work to make it buildable.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean there isn't buildable land.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the city owns a big chunk out above that bench above the city airstrip.
Oh, right.
Yeah, there isn't any access and there aren't any utilities, but
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of thing like, do we want to contribute to making that happen? Would we, if a developer came in and said, I would put 5 or 6 homes up there, what would the city do to help make that more feasible? But I think too, there are lots, like there's a lot on First Street or New England Cannery Road, whatever it's called, that there used to be a house that Ralph and Linda Losi lived in on a lot. It's an original town site lot. There's no home on it now, but there was a home and it would be bigger than a tiny home. It's totally buildable. It's open. I guess, I say it's open. I guess it's owned by Becky Chapik, and so somebody would have to be able to buy it from her, but there's nothing on it right now and it's platted as residential.
Yeah,
Zoned as
I can
residential.
list, probably 10, 15 lots that are flat buildable lots, I mean, Second Street, besides those ones that are owned by the city across the elementary school, excluding those, I mean, you've got 2 or 3 lots on Second Street. There's a lot across the street from my house on Third Street that's flat and ready to be built on. There's, there's lots all over town. Center Drive has lots out there ready to be built on. It's just that nobody's building on them. And what is it holding back either the property owners that currently have them from either building themselves or selling them to allow somebody else to build on them? And so that's where we get into this thing where everyone says, there's no buildable land. Well, there is, but nobody wants to build on it. Or nobody wants to sell it to let someone build on it.
That's probably more the reality. Nobody's willing to sell it.
Well, there's 2 city lots that have been available since I was the planner on Center Street. Yeah, it is a little bit of a blowhole through there, but they're great lots. They got a marsh behind them. You don't have any neighbors behind you. I mean, there are some benefits.
So is there an opportunity then for us to incentivize the building on these lots?
Right.
Like that's what it seems like to me is, sure, we can't control what private owner has it. I wish we could. But can we incentivize them to sell? I don't know, can we? Big question mark there, because there's several, and the individual's name was already mentioned, that has lots in town. Is there a way to incentivize the individual or any individual like that to sell? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, the start would be to tax them at their true value instead of the very low values that we have on them. That would be the start.
We heard from a few people this year because we did do that. And they came in and said, my tax bill on these 4 lots used to be like $15. It's like 300 now. I said, I bet you could sell those. So people have heard that,
Mhm.
Tom. I think it is slowly working.
Yeah, and that's the help of the computerized program. We keep track of
Yes.
what's
Yeah.
available.
Exactly.
Go ahead. We might need you on a mic. Okay.
I just have a question about, sure, incentivizing people to sell the lots that they already own, but possibly also incentivizing them to actually build something and giving them some kind of incentive so that they could afford to build, kind of like you were talking about a little bit earlier. That would probably spur some people to develop their lots.
Yep. Could you hear that online, Tom?
Yes, I got the gist of it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, this is by no means, there's not one solution to this problem.
Right.
There is multifaceted, everything. This is whatever idea, let's hear it and let's vet it and let's talk about it. Because that's what we need. We're the way I see our community, we're at a stagnant point. And for us to kind of get to the next level, which is lots of things, increase our tax base is part of it, is how do we get over this hurdle? What are other communities doing and what can we do? And I guess seeing Mr. Romhel in the audience, I'm putting you on the spot. You don't have to answer. You do development around the state. What would incentivize you to do some work in Cordova?
hard to get someone from out of town to come in to do a development. The economic problem here is that we really don't have enough money in the community for the development we want, given the cost of development that's required, okay? So it would be better to focus, I think, to focus on the builders that you do have and educating some of the young people. I don't know, you probably teach kids how to do apps on phones in school. They used to have carpentry class when I was in school, so it's really not that complex. I learned how to do it. The incentives should be directed, like Tom mentioned, more at the developer or the builder. Now, the builder might be the owner of the property themselves, they might be the developer who's selling to someone else, because you know that the demand is there. The demand for housing is there, those people will pay whatever the, you know, the tax assessment district fees are, or whatever. Try to get some relief to those who have to put the initial capital into making this happen. And you've already mentioned, every single comment that I've heard has been good, is like on point. So you've got the right idea. But I think what you've got here, based on the study that was done, and I think it's pretty accurate, except for a few glaring deficiencies like counting bunkhouse beds and latent housing.
Right.
The summation was you need 21 to 2 bedroom houses, you need 23 to 4. So if you have a log jam in a river, you don't try to find the biggest log that is jackknifed right in the river and try to clear that one, Dave, right? You go find the littlest piece you can move that allows everything to flow. We have a logging, or we have a logging housing jam. We have a housing log jam. What's the easiest piece to move that gets things flowing again? I would say it's 1 to 2 bedroom apartments. 21 to 2 bedroom apartments frees up 23 to 4 bedroom houses, because demographically it shows that our population is generally older than the state average. Those folks want to get out of their home and into an apartment. They still want to live in Cordova. And then you have a 3 to 4 bedroom house that's available for the young up and coming family. So I would say, and I'm sorry, I wandered from your question.
Nope, nope, not at all.
It seems like there are solutions that don't take, you know, massive amounts of extra studying. Like, let's figure out how to incentivize some apartment buildings. Now, we can incentivize some other things, but I would say by incentivizing, don't give anything away. You don't have to get less local revenue, less revenue into the government. I would say defer it or figure out how to share some of the costs or spread the costs out. So like, we've got a 15-acre property that it would be really nice to have an assessment district for the utility installed, right? So that that expense, the city, well, come up with an arrangement between the developer and the city so that we can put the utilities in and it's assessed when the property is sold, rather than that being another capital burden on the developer, which is just another disincentive. But I'm trying to find the simplest logs to move and hope it frees things up and the housing market starts flowing. I don't think you're going to find a lot of people that are going to come to town. The reason we don't have a lot of builders in town is because the builders aren't getting rich in Cordova. And granted, I know that it's difficult to get a builder. I mean, Casey, you tried to get me a couple of years ago to work on your place, and we didn't have time, and nobody had time. So there's a little bit of a chicken and egg there thing, but our economy is not sufficiently vital and energetic where people are getting all excited about building their dream home in Cordova. And that's kind of rough. So I really like Wendy's comment about how do we do incremental little things. And Kenny, you know, let's incentivize putting a second place that's seasonal, so it opens up another location for permanent year round. I think you've got some really good ideas, but you probably gotta come up with a matrix and figure out which ones are worth chasing. Because I think you could have this committee here for 10 years and in 10 years still be saying the same things unless you can pin it down to a few things that you can actually move on.
I wonder about if we could like do some form of first one, you know, like the thought of giving 10 points to a developer who comes and brings the project idea to the table. Let's do like some kind of lottery thing. Like the first guy that comes to the table with our dream, you know, fourplex gets 10 years of tax rebates. And it's one-time deal. I think that would generate a lot of thought process, a healthy competition, and people who know us and are here already invested might, I don't know.
Yeah. I was just gonna ask Kevin, so how specific are you looking for us to get tonight, Kevin? And can we, I mean, if we're interested in sort of a range of 2 or 3 or 4 types of incentives, can we say like, yes, we would like you to come back with recommendations for tax abatement? Or yes, we'd like you to come back with 2 or 3 recommendations about incentives for developers. I mean, I feel like like Dave said, you know, we're all agreeing, I think conceptually on what we would like to see happen. And I'm wondering how specific we feel like we can get tonight, or can you kind of work up a range of options that gives us a little bit more specificity to work with?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been working with Jess on that as well. I mean, we've been taking notes from all the conversations we've had so far. So I mean, the more specific you can get, the better product we can get to you to then refine that even more. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have, you know, some general consensus of you know, with incentives, you really get to choose what do you want to target.
Yeah.
And so if we have a better idea of what it is you want to target, is it the single family homes? Is it the fourplexes? Is it the mixed use? Then we know where to really focus our effort on bringing you something that is hopefully close to the mark, that then once it's brought to you in front as an ordinance and really get people's attention, we can then refine it down even more and then continue it through the process to finalize it. So,
okay.
I think the meeting after this is also gonna hone in on some of those more synced incentives and things to talk about. And so that's a good time. If people want to hang out another hour.
but I
Go
think,
through
I think
those.
it's definitely important to get close to what is it that you want to focus on. This is your chance to really target what do we want in this community? What do we need in this community? And push the bulk of the incentives, whatever they may be, towards those instead of, you know, shotgun blasting across everything.
Right.
This is our chance to choose what is it that we want to really bring in.
So do we have in our zoning code, I know there's a minimum lot size. There's not a minimum square footage for a home that you put on a piece of property, is there?
We like a floor area ratio, something like.
Yeah.
No, we don't have that.
So it more pertains to making sure that you meet the sanitation code and
Yeah, I mean, the
electrical
zoning
code and
code's pretty simple. We don't have a lot of restrictions. You can build quite a lot in most districts. I provided a table in the back of this packet that shows the different uses that are allowed in the different zones. Really, the big things that the zoning code covers is the height of the structure and the setbacks from the property line.
Right.
And parking requirement.
So there's no restriction on a tiny home. I mean, you have to comply with other elements of the
Yeah,
building
I mean,
code, but you can put a tiny home on a lot and.
It comes down to what are you defining as a tiny home? In our code, the way it is now, if it is not secured to the ground, either as a foundation or some other method, you know, of actually making it permanent, it's considered either a mobile home or an RV.
Okay.
And so our code's pretty strict about the use of those. We do have an exception, like was mentioned earlier, where if you're actively building a primary residence, you
Mhm.
can live in a tiny home or RV or whatever you want to call it while you're actively building.
But I mean, a tiny home could be a small home with a permanent structure,
Yeah,
permanent
yeah,
foundation.
definitely.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah.
restriction on how small
Right.
a house can be.
Yeah.
It just gets into the fact of, is it a house
Mhm.
or is it a RV slash
Right,
mobile home?
right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think making sure that that people know what is allowed in the code. Wendy had a great idea, making sure, putting together a packet of information about what's available to homeowners for improvements, for weatherization, for energy efficiency. Maybe we want to consider incentives for homeowner improvements, like a certain amount of years of tax forgiveness or tax abatement. That would be something worth considering. And then I think incentives, which yes, I know that we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but incentives for building new homes on property that isn't developed. What are we willing to do for that? Is it a 5-year tax abatement? Is it, there's a range of options that we could look at for that. So I think that's why I was asking, like, what are we willing to consider? How specific do we want to get? But because I think that's what we need to do, is get specific. And then as far as developers, like, the university has a bunch of property. The university isn't going to be the developer, but if a developer comes in and they've got the option to develop 6 or 8 pieces of property, what would we do to make it worth their while to come over here? So are we willing to talk about, either contributing to the cost of putting in the utilities or access or helping with surveying costs or whatever? I mean, there's a bunch of things we could do. So is it worth it to us to get 8 homes built and then have them added to our tax rolls for the next 50 years? Yeah. So
how available is university land? It seems like it's loosening up quite a bit over the last few years, the availability of it.
they're interested in selling.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've
And
got
there's
a couple.
quite a long
pieces.
time they weren't, but.
Mhm. Yeah, there's that one piece of property that's sort of between the marina and Echoes Lagoon, is that right?
Hmm.
Where's the one when they came, Kevin,
So
in June?
That's,
It's Heaney Creek.
It's Heaney Creek.
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, and then up on Whiskey Ridge, they have
Yeah.
that bluff. up
right,
there.
right. That's what it was. That's what I was thinking.
There were
That's the
some
one-
other lots along Whiteshed that they.
Yeah, they also
looking
wrap
at.
around 3 Mile Bay.
Yeah.
But the one that they're actively looking at is their Whiskey Ridge property.
Right, thank you. Yeah. Mhm.
Good.
So
Just a quick note, so you were talking about room sizes, houses sizes. The IRC, the International Residential Code, does specify minimum sizes for rooms, so for housing. So if you want to look at that, it does spell it out. Whether the city follows that, I don't know, but it is in code.
And we allow variances.
Yeah, I mean, someone could, but I mean, even with the IRC restrictions on room sizes, I mean, it doesn't require you to build a massive house. You could still build a
micro home or a modest
moderate,
home.
but what
Mhm.
am I trying, like a conservatively sized house.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you're not required to.
The room sizes are relatively small, but it does give you some guidelines, so yeah.
Mhm. Okay, thanks.
Ken?
So I guess one other thing that I ran into over the last few years and looking for developable property in this community, there's a couple of places in the community where past, I don't know if it was the planning and zoning or if it was city council or probably all of the above, that approved previous developments that had cul-de-sacs on the end that are then blocking access to the adjacent properties that would be amazing to develop. And I think Mr. Romehill actually has one of them. I looked at that one, it's about 15 acres, and you've got the previous developer of the adjacent development cul-de-saced it on each side, so that way nobody could get to either of the adjacent lots through that road. I don't feel like the city should have ever approved that the way it was. And I don't know if there's anything the city can do now. I mean, I don't think there is, aside from eminent domain of the little 5-foot slivers of land on the end of the cul-de-sac, but it's very unfortunate that was allowed to happen. and block future access and block the community from growing, because there's two choice potential subdivisions on each side of those cul-de-sacs, and they're just completely blocked right now. So something to
Yeah,
look into.
I would just add to that and definitely agree. I mean, that's just, to put it bluntly, horrible planning practice. I mean, connectivity is key, and I know the one that he's speaking of, and there are multiple subdivisions where there is public land or private land that is now permanently blocked from future development due to allowing cul-de-sacs. There's even been situations where we dead-ended future right-of-ways into cliffs instead of having them, follow the terrain more properly. So that's something that I've been, keeping my eye on. Unfortunately, there hasn't been any plots coming through where I've been able to, keep that from happening. But I mean, that's something that I'll definitely be keeping my eye on, even as not in the planning position. But I definitely think a code amendment to restrict cul-de-sacs unless, they're deemed absolutely necessary or something like that, because, at least in the lower 48, developers love cul-de-sacs because they can squeeze an extra lot or two out. And, they're looking for maximum lots for maximum profit, but at the cost of future connectivity to more developable land.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of our time. Anybody from Planning Commission have any other words? Yeah.
I, with being a property owner myself and a landlord, such as Dave was saying, and I think Wendy as well. I could rent every 1-bedroom apartment that you could give me. The tiny home thing, I think with the restrictions of it being considered an RV or a mobile, like Kevin was saying, our code is pretty strict on that. We're talking about building mother-in-law apartments, putting tiny homes on our properties and stuff. Such as Kristen was saying, I mean, there's places all over town that people have property that, are able to do that, but a lot of code doesn't allow it for the way that it's worded. So I think that maybe that would be a good incentive to be able to change code or look into that deeper to allow those kinds of things to happen. I mean, there's a tiny home for sale right now. She wants to sell it before she leaves on Monday. I know there's 3 tiny homes sitting out on Whiteshed Road, empty. Not friendly. They're coming more and more popular. There's a lot to them, and there's nothing stating that you can't take them off a trailer and put them down on the ground, so. I think that that's a viable option to be able to use maximum capacity at some of these lots that have a home on them that has open space to be able to do something like that, so. Just my thought.
Anybody else from planning have any last thoughts? Again, it's
Yeah.
a workshop. Next meeting's a workshop too, so.
If I could just join in, I know it's hard to hear, I'm on the phone.
It's Tanya.
Yeah, go ahead, Tanya.
I just a couple thoughts I had while listening to the discussion. It seems like a lot of the ideas that were thrown out were focused on offering things such as education. Maybe we want a building inspector. How can we reduce the cost of utility development? And then the other thoughts that have been tossed out have been more in terms of direct cash in the form of property tax cuts. And I guess it might be a good idea if we can actually work those into a fully fleshed idea, so we don't end up trying to do both, because one will take money and one will give the city less, if you know what I mean. So as someone who just built a house, the property tax incentive, I'm not sure would be enough to really, a few $1,000s on the cost of a whole house may not be all that much. And that money may be more valuable for the town, but and then I suppose the other thing that we haven't really talked on too much is, are there any ways that we can actually tie some of these incentives to housing specifically for certain kinds of jobs in town that we need housing for, like teachers, public safety, and medical staff. That way it may be possible to incentivize people to build homes for folks who are actually planning to be permanent residents of Cordova versus, tourist rental properties, which we don't really need. So those, and also in the, document, I see that there was talk about the number of homes that were needed, 20 additional single family homes, 10 senior housing and 20 long-term rentals, but it didn't indicate any kind of time frame for that development. And it suggested that the number of new homes that had been constructed was near zero. But I can think of about 7 that have been built just since I started building mine. So I'd just be curious to know how are they calculating number of homes being built? And do we have an idea about what our target number is? How many homes do we want built every year?
Yeah, I would assume that number, that 20 number and such was, if we had that now, it would be snatched up now. How fast you get there and how much turnover you have,
Right.
is always variable. The way I look at it, I guess with the tax abatement anyway, is that unless it was gonna be built already and doesn't need an incentive, which there are gonna be a few of those, would we say 1 to 2 a year? Is what I think Kevin told us last meeting, how many building permits for houses were, but it doesn't really cost the city anything. If it's truly incentivizing them to build, then that tax abatement, if they don't build, we don't get it. If they build, we get it eventually, but maybe not right away. So I think tax abatements are an easy one for me. The other things that cost money, we'd want to look into more detail. It would truly need to be incentives to build, but you need to make an incentive. And I guess Councilmember Kinsman said it earlier, but we need to know from the people who are willing and able to build what it would take them. And I would guess that the answer to most of that is probably going to be like Councilmember Jones said, is the getting reasonable money to do the project. I think that a lot of projects would get done. If we had easy access to money, there'd be a lot more projects made, but yeah, Kristen.
Just going to offer, there is a rural professional housing grant program that funds the development of teacher, health professional, and public safety housing. It's got some eligibility criteria. I don't know how they verify that housing goes to those professionals, but I tried to check in on would we qualify, because it says small community. Obviously, we're small, a community with a population of 6,500 or less that's not connected by road or by trail. And there's something about how many units we already have in town managed by a housing authority. So I contacted the North Pacific Rim Housing Authority to ask them. Yeah.
And just follow up on that. I mean, other communities do that. I mean, whether it's part of their benefits package, that part of your benefits package is housing, or it's automatic payroll deduction. I mean, you can go through anywhere in the Arctic and their housing is one way or another in that form. Like you have teacher housing and you have medical housing, and people are doing it.
Yeah.
It already exists.
Yeah.
So
We can figure that out.
yeah. Yep. Definitely.
Okay, last chance for planning commission, and we'll move over to the council continuation with, I think Jess is online, yeah?
Yeah. Hang on. Oh, we
You want-
kind of had this set up as 2 separate
Right.
things. So is anybody who's on the line from Planning Commission? I guess it's just Tanya. Would you want to, well, I don't know if you saw both Zoom invites, but you can call into the next one if you want to, Tanya, okay?
Okay, so our time being up, we will adjourn the joint